Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the sixth episode of Sealing Up Insight, a competitive focused Riftbound podcast. I am NA45 Fritz, joined here today by my friend Aaron McGinnis. How are you doing, Aaron?
What's good? Happy to be here, back talking some Earthbound. It's a lot of changes since the last time we spoke, so it's going to be a good, interesting one to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it happened like just in time too, because I'm going to Lille next week, and I'm very happy that things are kind of shaken up a little bit because I actually didn't mind miracle stuff too much, but it really was like we complained all about that last episode, so go check that out
Yeah,
if you want to see it. But it is there's a lot of new stuff. So
for sure.
segueing right into our topics for today, because it's going to be all revolving around this new stuff, is we're going to go over the ban list. And I'm sure at this point, everyone has seen the ban list, seen 3 million videos talking about it, but we're just going to give our takes on it, especially since our last episode was talking about what we wanted. And now we can do a little comparison. Did we get what we want? We'll see there. Then we're going to go over the rules update. So the Unleashed rules rework, update, erratas, whatever. Uh, they do on every main set, so here we go. See the new ones, see what changes, because there are some important changes there. Then we're going to go over. There were a couple tournaments. Obviously, the New Zealand 10K is the big one, but there was also a Runes and Rift online tourney, which is the biggest online tournaments as far as I'm aware. So some results there to look at. We're going to talk about the format after we look at the results of some of the tournaments, and that will wrap us up with some predictions for Leo, what decks are going to do well there. So let us jump right into it. I'm actually going to pull this up, but we're going to look at the ban list. So here we go. Here's our ban list. Announcing Earthbound's first bans. So this is something that we did talk about last time, but they didn't actually plan on doing bans in this game. At least that's how they made it sound through social media. It was just the community is complaining so much that we have to do something about it. I mean, is that's the vibe you got as well, Aaron? Like,
Yeah, I mean, especially early in the game, like I assume they expected it to happen at some
mhm.
point, but like the community, we'll say outcry was very loud, especially on X/Twitter. Like, I don't, and it seems like the content creators and community managers, like they're pretty active in that space. So like hopping on and seeing like, hey, this game's cool, but like, and that happening every day, week, month, that especially after we saw the Miracle decks kind of take over, I think was it kind of was inevitable. Like I think either they did something or I think the game took a pretty big drop off because from the looks of it, I don't think set 3 would have meaningfully impacted how strong Miracle decks were in the grand scheme of things. So I think it kind of needed to happen, especially if they want to like push new product and keep the game fresh and provide like new champions and have them be impactful in the game. Like I don't think that's gonna happen under the old ban list or like lack of ban list.
Yeah, and if anything, I feel like it may have even ended up with more miracle stuff happening. We don't need to dive too much into it, real format with the ban, but like for instance, like the blue gen seems like a miracle card to me. That's the card
Mhm.
that's just like play it for a power if you played a 4 cost. So more units that just play themselves for free. So now
Yeah.
Ezreal would have had like 6 minimum units that just played for free. So,
Mhm.
but anyways, so looking at the ban list, they actually banned a lot of stuff, and we were
Yes.
hopeful, I guess, that they would ban a lot of stuff. I didn't expect them to. I thought that honestly they were only going to ban Call Shot. That was my guess. I was going to say they were going to be very conservative about it, but I actually do think this is relatively conservative, even though it is a lot of cards, as it doesn't kill anything. So just going over it real quick, Called Shot. This one was a gimme. I think every single person who ever did a banlist prediction was like Called Shots getting banned. Red Draven was a cool hit that I had seen a lot of people talk about, and it is a good way to tune down Draven, but they do give a reason why they banned it that I think is a bit silly. And Fight or Flight, this is a good one. I like this one a lot. I think that this was like a hidden power card. It's funny because it's a hidden card, but it's not something that people talked about too much besides that the card is good. But the card was pretty absurd for what it is. And Scrap Heap is just a very targeted miracle hit. They, this is what surprised me the most was them banning three battlefields though. So what are your takes
Yeah.
on all this here?
Um. Yeah, I'm really happy that Fight or Flight got banned. Like that card was like just so versatile, so oppressive, especially with how like the battlefields and like damage being dealt thing is. Like ignoring how powerful Draven is with the card, being able to like set Fight or Flight and dodge cards like Piercing Light was just like really really dumb. The card was just so versatile for two or like being able to hide for a power. It also provided like ganking for units. The card was just like way too strong. Scrap Heap was a fantastic hit. Like it, I think fixes a lot of like it still maintains that discard is a cost, and it's not just like something that can be like kind of cheated around. Like Ezra went from like a minus or like it went neutral in cards to now it's like a or whatever. Went to a plus, like plus like a noticeable amount. So that type of stuff was important. And then the battlefields are all good hits. I think the obelisk one is I think the big discussion I've seen about online is like the play draw discrepancy and like obelisk kind of helps like you're going second, so having obelisk to put you on four like definitely matters because as of right now in Riftbound, the 3 mana turn is like pretty underwhelming. They've done like some things to try and help that with cards like I think Sea Monkey's one of them where like it's a 2 drop that like when you're going second has a little bit more utility. In general, that hasn't really mattered though. So outside of like Stack Deck plus Noxious Hopeful, there isn't really like a good 3 mana turn. So everyone's like, okay, I'm just going second, you obelisk. Um, and like you just kind of ignore like that whole like issue of going second. Obviously, you're still at a disadvantage, but like unless they decide to fix going first, you get to draw a card or would not get to draw a card. I think that's one of the ways to fix it. I think if they're looking at it from just like a representation standpoint, I think Obelisk was in like what 90% of decks that topped, and if you look at it from that perspective, it is definitely a card worth hitting. Same for a card like Cold Shot. Reaver's Row, I think, was just like one of the primary reasons that Draven performed as well as it did. Um, Not primary, like obviously Blader's still very good, but like I think the Reaver's Row game for Draven was just like an absurdly high win rate. Overall, yeah, I think it's a good list. I was again honestly surprised at how much they hit. Um, Again, there are like a couple of cards that I think like have design issues, and I think the most obvious ones are Stellarcorn and Aurora. I think everyone's talked about those. Like, I think those are cards that will get hit in the future. Aurora, especially with the card like Eldrake that we see in set three. Like, Aurora just like limits future design in like a pretty scary way. Or if it doesn't, like, it can just be taken advantage of. But overall, I think it's just very solid first effort. I don't have like major complaints considering my expectations were pretty low based off of what we had seen previously. So like pat on the back, like it's definitely better than what I expected, and they hit a lot of cards that at least like do what the uh like the player base is looking for. Or I think it does shift the meta in like a meaningful way. It's definitely going to be less miracle. I think Draven's still good, but it's going to be less oppressive. And yeah, like I think that's what a lot of people were looking for.
Yeah, I think I agree for the most part. I do wish, like you said, that they had been even a little bit more aggressive with their hits, and that's asking a ton. Don't get me wrong; it's like I said before, they already hit more than I expected them to. But it would have been nice if they had taken care of like Stellar Corn and Aurora as well on this list. So we're not going into set three with these cards legal. And I mean, the gimme one is like you said. I think the Elder Drake card just orange as a color. As long as Aurora is legal, it feels like you are so tied to Aurora. Like the orange
Mhm.
decks that are going to be good are Aurora decks or leaders that are orange that have broken abilities set. Um,
Yeah,
so it is what it is. I personally think the reasoning for banning Red Draven, I think it is a good hit. Their reasoning for banning it, I think, is kind of silly though. I don't know if you saw this, but it was on Twitter and in the
I
Discord.
missed it. Yeah.
But essentially, they said, oh, they might have even put it on here. Okay, yeah, they said in here is they didn't want to ban a leader, so they banned Red Draven. That was their reasoning, is they wanted to weaken
Yeah.
Draven, but they didn't want to ban the leader. And I understand where they're coming from. I just don't think that there's anything they can do to the card pool besides ban Draven that will stop Draven from just being the best leader in those card colors. Because draw
Yeah.
is insane. Stellar Corn
Yeah.
is insane because it draws infinite cards. Draven Leader is insane because it draws infinite cards. And the requirements of what the Draven Leader does, it warps gameplay around it. If you watch high level gameplay with the Draven Leader, with either player, it doesn't even need to be the Draven player or the opponent. If there's a Draven in the gameplay is entirely different because you cannot leave stuff on the battlefield. You either need to have a protection for the combat like every single time, or you need to leave the battlefields empty. And that's why some of the decks that are particularly good against Draven, like the Lucian deck is kind of the premier example, they just never leave anything on the battlefield ever. Because it's
Mhm.
like, I'm going to double conquer, I'm going to retreat. I'm going to double conquer, retreat. And unless you're denying that draw from Draven, I mean, the Draven leader just drowns you in card advantage. And it's just something that a lot of decks can't do. You don't feasibly have a way to move that much. So I personally would have preferred seeing the Draven leader banned, but it sounds to me like they're really leaning into the idea that they want people to have like a main, just like League of Legends. Maybe they're appealing to that crowd. They're like, hey,
Yeah.
I want to be able to play Draven every game, so whatever. Like, I don't want
Mm.
to have to ban a leader. I think
It-
eventually they will have to ban the leader,
yeah.
but
I was curious if they, like, I'm surprised they didn't errata it. I guess they're just like trying to avoid
mhm,
erratas completely that aren't rule changes. I think they did mention that at some point.
mhm.
Um, this seems like one of the most obvious situations to just be like, hey, like make it once per turn. Obviously it's still good, or like yeah, it's like tap it. Same to like Ezreal. Like again, it's still very good, but I don't think it warps the game in the same way. Where like, oh, like if you go for a double conquer, like they can't draw two, right? They can only draw one. So there's definitely like a noticeable difference in that situation. Um, and the other thing is, I'm curious if like they're waiting until after like the three set rotation or however they're doing it, where like they give out the best of. So I think it's after set four is when they stop giving out set two best ofs. So at that point, they may be more inclined to ban Draven, assuming it's still good. Um, and then that'll be like a really interesting like kind of game theory thing is like there's no best of for Draven, but like theoretically, if it's like still one of the top like three decks in set five, like does that affect representation? And if so, how does it happen? So I'm kind of curious to see how this game shapes out over the next year with that in mind. But yeah, I mean this leader is still very strong. The people that said it was not going to be still like a top three or top five deck, I think definitely have something to learn. Like even if you like find it like holes to poke in Draven gameplay wise, it just farms every deck that wants to play like fair Riftbound. There are decks that don't play fair Riftbound, like you mentioned. Lucian has a good matchup into it. I think Aurora can have some decent matchups into it depending on the builds, or they just like avoid giving them card draw, and there's not less fight or flight so that they can't like cheat out those last few points. So yeah, like if you're trying to play a fair game of Riftbound, like I don't think anything really comes close to doing what Draven does in that form of gameplay. Like it just replaced itself every turn. There's no more dreaming tree, so like Aurelia can't like kind of cheese out those games, and there's no obelisk, so you can't like kind of scale like quicker like through the mid game, and it's definitely going to be a Draven's world still.
Yep. We will go. We do have a segment a little bit later where we're going to talk about the format, but for now, we're going to move on to rules updates and the rules. So I wrote a list down here because like there's a lot here, and I think this is something that Riot really does need to work on is making this more readable. Because I distinctly remember when this was released, I was in Discord and I went back and forth like two times on whether they changed the combat mechanics just because I was reading it and I'm like, I don't understand what they're trying to say. So
I think
I
I remember
think,
that chat, and like four different people just like didn't know how to like comprehend it.
yeah, so I really would like them to improve this. There really should just be like a section at the top with bullet point big changes in simplified words. Because right as this
Also,
is,
examples of something I've heard is like not always readily available
yeah.
of like how these rules are actually like applied in game.
Okay, so I do have the list. So there's a lot here. I have some highlights that I've pulled out. So the first one, and I'm gonna go from like order of most important to least important, is the trigger. At least this is in my opinion, and I might have missed one because I did go through this myself. I was really hoping that there was a judge out there who wrote a really nice write up, but I couldn't find one. So I might be missing some, and I apologize. And if I am missing one, call it out in the chat. But but the first one is that triggers with may are now optional to put on the chain, and tying right in with this is when you have a trigger that says do X. A good example is going to be overzealous fan. So here, let me actually pull this card up. So overzealous fan, for instance, in this case, the card says, and it's a shame these cards are worded so poorly, but essentially it says you have to kill to push something, right? But in
Mhm.
previously, before the rule change, how this card worked is you would say, I'm going to use fan, whatever, and then on resolution, it would kill itself and move something. Now, how this is working is if you are triggering fan, you kill it and target at the same time. So there's no more like, okay, my opponent used fan, now I can gust it before it resolves and stop it from resolving. So you do actually have to pay the costs when you use the effect. And
Yeah,
the other consequence of this, and I'm not going to pull it up because it's kind of annoying. Actually, you know what? I will. What's
definitely unique.
monastery of what's it called? I,
Harana, I believe.
I'm gonna butcher
Spelled
this.
monastery
Okay,
wrong, I think.
I found it. I found it. Monastery of. So, oh, nice. I love the sideways. Well, this card says when you conquer here, you may spend a buff to draw one. And this was one of the only orange draw engines in the game. Was Warmogs is orange, right? Or is
Yeah,
it
it
green?
was Warmog's armor
Yeah.
plus,
So
or yeah.
Warmogs is a one cost orange gear. It says when you conquer, you buff this unit, and it combined with Monastery was again one of the only orange draw engines in the game. Orange notoriously awful for draw. These decks have no way to see cards besides random one-off cards that give you a single draw or whatever. But with the combination of these two, you are able to conquer on the Monastery with a unit with Warmogs on it. You're able to declare Hirana effect and Warmog effect, even if you didn't have a buff on the unit already. And the reason being is before you didn't actually have to fulfill the requirements when you activated a trigger effect. Well, it was more that triggers were not optional, right? Because you're always activating.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
now you actually have to be able to meet the condition and pay the condition to activate the trigger. And in this case, you cannot spend a buff if you do not have a buff. So you cannot activate.
Yes.
So a bit of a annoying change for the orange decks. I mean, I imagine Set was happy to finally have a way to draw cards.
Yeah. I think this is like a good change. Like it's definitely different than what people are probably used to. But this is I think how most card games generally work is like you have to be able to pay cost for a card before you can activate said card. Um so well I think this is just like overall a pretty healthy change, even if it does take a bit of you getting used to for people that haven't played Riftbound. So no
Yeah.
major complaints for me here. Like fan being able to dodge cost or whatever because of game mechanics just seems very silly. So cost being required, I think, is a good thing. Being able to stack the sequencing of Monastery and Warmog and stuff like that, like losing that is a bit like annoying, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it is overall a positive change.
Yep. Okay, so on to the next one, and this is a bit of a sad one because this is a deck that I actually thought was pretty cool. I think that it was one of the more interesting rogue decks, in my opinion, was the Jax deck. And they kind of
Yeah.
said no to Jax deck existing, and they called it a patch. I call it a slaughter, but essentially they changed the ruling of Jax to match how it was ruled in China, where second ability was not able to re-equip an equipment to the same units. I I think you're actually allowed to
You,
do it. It just doesn't
you can,
trigger.
nothing triggers though.
Yeah. So before, what would happen is, let's say you had a brutalizer and it was on a Poro, a lonely Poro. You could use. Sorry, if you let's just use the Aphelios because the Aphelios is the. So if you have a random equipment, blank equipment, and you had it attached to Aphelios from the previous turn, you could use the Jack's second ability to detach and reattach that equipment to the Aphelios and then trigger Aphelios as a. And you can no longer do this. So now, if you do want to get these setups, it is a lot more annoying. You need multiple units. You have to move around the equipment every turn. It's no longer a engine on its own because there's some cool stuff you could do. Like, one of my favorite uses of it was with the, how do you say it, Svelsonger
Still hungry, yeah.
in an Orange Jacks was you would attach your Svelsonger to your Orange Jacks, and then you would just every turn you would just use the Jack's second ability to draw two with it because it would just double trigger the Orange Jacks. Can't do this anymore. I think this was a sad change, and I understand that they might have been like, "Oh, we didn't mean it that way," but it didn't feel like it was really abusive or anything. Maybe it will be in future sets, and they wanted to kind of like nip it at the bud, but something I'm a little bit sad about. Then, all right, so the next change was there the Lucian signature spell, and I don't know if this was a overall rule, just the card, but I think this was specifically like an errata on this card. But
It was, I think.
before, you were required to attach equipment, so you could only activate this if you had both an equipment and a unit. And now they made it clear in an errata that the equipment attaching is optional. So you can actually use this without an equipment as just an expensive move. Not
Yeah.
expensive, but as a move.
Hmm.
So that is a reasonable buff to Lucian.
Yeah, for
Let's
sure.
see what else is
I
there.
was gonna say, I think with these types of cards, like,
Hmm.
I'm not sure if it's just like me. I'm not sure if being dumb is the right word, but like, it just seems kind of strange. I'm not sure if it's like a wording issue that they have in their production, or if some of this type of stuff. But like, let's like Relentless Pursuit, and then like Stormbringer, and then Arcane Shift, where like some of these require both targets and some of them don't. I'm not sure if there should be more continuity across all of these cards where like yes, every condition needs to be met, or like why specific cards only require some and not the other. I'm not sure if like I just need to read the cards better. But I just feel kind of strange that like some of these cards require as long as you have one condition, like you can activate it, but like a card like Arcane Shift specifically requires like all of them. Um, it just seems a little bit strange from like a player perspective. It's obviously not from like a judge, but it just seems kind of like I'm not sure the right word, but I wish it was like a little more uniform in that regard. Or it may also be like because like wall of text and I'm like bad at reading, so maybe that's part of the problem. But like when I see wall of text, it's usually like, okay, you need like all of these things to resolve or whatever. So I think it's my only real gripe. Like all of these like changes and like clarifications, I think are positive. I just wish like maybe on release there was a little bit more clarity with these types of things.
Yeah, I don't really understand how it even got in this state because from what I understand is they did like the people who made this game are people who've worked in the industry, like the card game industry before. They've designed cards and stuff before, maybe not, or at least that's what I've heard.
Mhm.
Is and so I'm really confused how it got to this state where Magic. I'm just gonna use Magic as an example, not Yu-Gi-Oh, because I always use Yu-Gi-Oh as the example. But Magic has been around for what, like 30 years or something ridiculous,
I think
and
longer at this point. Yeah.
yeah, and there the card text for that game is very easy to read. Cards do what they say, and for the most part, I can pick up a card and understand what it does. It's even easier in Yu-Gi-Oh, but Yu-Gi-Oh has a thing with longer text, so but how can something be like this for so long and you not just copy it? It feels like they're like, we want to do it our way. We can't copy what already exists, and as a result, they just got left with a lot of really hard to read card text that
Yeah.
when they could have just copied what worked. But um, I guess if they do end up changing anything and making fixes to card text, we won't even see it until like what, set 4 or 5.
Yeah, that's the only issue with like having everything pre-done, which I think in the grand scheme of things is like better, right? That way you don't have to worry about hitting deadlines and whatever. Like having these first couple sets
Yeah,
pre-made is good, but like maybe there's a little bit like I think printing it may have been a mistake. Like maybe you have a little more flexibility in terms of like hard text. May have been nice. So like I said, all these things I think are just like small quality of life things that like in the grand scheme of things probably aren't that big of a deal, but like I think it definitely makes the game a little bit more difficult to understand than maybe is necessary. So
yeah,
well, I'll just throw that out there.
yep. Um, so there were a couple other small changes. I say small, but I'm not going to go too deep into them because it's straightforward. As they made a rule change, which now means that Ezreal applies before Vex, and what this does mean is you can no longer have the 0 energy bellows. Vex is in combat. Ezreal found even deader in a ditch, as it was already very. I'm so sad about that. But what can you do? I mean, some people have already been messing with like some Tempo Ezreal. I'm not convinced, but Cold Shot was quite a brutal hit.
Good
Um,
card.
then the last change that I'm gonna highlight. I'm sure I've missed changes. I'm sure I've missed erratas. These are just the ones that I found quickly. Is that so? Before Draven was able to get a draw off the leader ability, if he won the, so they changed the rules of how combat is like won, and it doesn't fix the Draven leader. He still is getting draws most of the time, but one scenario where he no longer will get a draw is if I am playing a yellow deck, I use Imperial Decree, and I send a unit in, and the Draven player has 1 unit. Well, normally, or at least how this would resolve last set, is my unit gets assigned combat damage, dies, then it goes down to like goes to the cleanup step, I want to believe, or the end of combat. Then at that point, Draven has won the combat, so he gets the draw, but then his unit dies from decree. But now you do not get that draw because the decree like resolves first. I Anyways, a bit complex. I think there's like something else with Yone's Stormbringer that's still being discussed in the Discord, the judges' Discord, whether it works or not anymore. We're just gonna move on because I don't know. Okay, so next topic for today is we were going to go over some of the post Banlist tournaments that happened, and the big one, and we had a couple people from our Discord, some of your friends,
Yeah.
go to this, and they did pretty well, right?
Yeah, so I made top four with Draven, and Bowden. I think he said went 5-3, lost out to not knowing what his opponent's deck did. So shout out Bowden for not knowing how to beat Rogue in any game.
But yeah, you can see immediately at
Yeah,
a
Draven's a good,
glance that
pretty good. It was like 6 of the top 8, if I remember correctly, and then whatever,
yeah,
one in finals, 3 in top four. Like, yeah, people were like, yeah, this Draven deck's like kind of B tier, maybe whatever. I'm like, nah, like this is like I said, even if you find holes to poke in this deck, it just beats every fair deck. And Aurelia definitely lost some things with like Obelisk and Dreaming Tree. Like now you don't have consistent draw engines in every turn slash game. So like that deck when you don't draw Stellar Corn definitely has some concerns. And Draven is just like the one deck in the game that's just like, yep, I'm gonna keep drawing cards as long as we're playing Riftbound, and it's really there aren't too many decks that can afford to not play Riftbound and still win. So definitely still gonna be a menace in the format.
yeah, and it is a little bit disappointing because this was one of the things that we did talk about in the last episode is that set one really kind of, I'm not going to say lied to us, but set one presented a game that is not Riftbound now. And it feels like a little bit of a shame that we've kind of lost that because I enjoyed it a lot. I know you said you enjoyed it, and Draven is just even the non-miracle Draven. So I'm saying Draven as a whole, not just Miracle, but Draven is a deck that punishes you for playing that Rift because you don't play that
Mm.
Rift, and it is what it is. But I guess we can take a couple looks at these lists. It is obviously mid-range Draven. There's no more Miracle. Well, it yeah, I guess
And we know
if someone finds something.
we'll see what that's. Yeah.
Um, but I mean, honestly, I was looking at these lists and they really don't look any different for the most part. Like you switch over to Red Raven, sorry, the set one Raven,
Yeah. Showboat.
Raven Showboat, and you switch your battlefields, and that really, otherwise, it looks very similar.
Yeah, I mean, like I think there's now a bit more forerunner in the format
Hmm.
because, like, I think the format is like marginally slower just because we don't have like 30 might dropped on us on turn three. Um, so like it's like we are still playing, I would say, closer to set one Riftbound. There is just one deck that is noticeably better at set one Riftbound than everything else. So that is something to be definitely aware of.
Interesting one. Oh yeah, so Lucian getting second place was interesting. I will say I have been told, and I have not had experience playing this deck. I've casted it a few times. I've never been super enthused by it, but I have a couple people I talk to who are Lucian enthusiasts specifically because, in their words, they say it beats Draven. So now, if the format is going to be more Draven dominated, I think it might be more Draven even dominated than last format because at least last format there were a bunch of different miracle choices. Like you could play Silver Miracle, you could play like the Ezreal Miracle slash Control, but now it's like you just play Draven mid range. Um, but with that aside, Lucian supposedly has a good Draven matchup, so this might be a decent choice. I've found it has consistency issues myself. Like you are probably two of the worst draw colors in the game. Red
Yeah,
has like a little bit, but
I think it's definitely like room for this deck to thrive, especially like let's say you look at Draven and like you're like, okay, there's no fight or flight and there's no Reaver's Rose, so like I can just play like an Aurora deck and kind of beat them down. Like that's another deck that's kind of slow, and Lucian may be able to just to like combo their way to victory, right? So I think this deck it could kind of like cheat its way through, like to have like some decent placings. Like if it makes top 16 in one of these RQs, like it wouldn't surprise me. Like I think it's like you said, the consistency is definitely noticeable. Like outside of Kaisa, there's like no draw power in this deck that I'm looking at except Angle Shot, right? So it's just like just to replace itself. So outside of Kaisa and that, then like there's not too much you can do. But I think like if this deck gets like a good run of like draws and like even just like a marginal like field, like if you're playing against, like I said, like Aurora and Draven a fair bit, then this deck could just go on like a pretty deep run. I don't think this is like best deck, anything like that sort, but like I definitely think it has like a niche in the meta that it can take advantage of.
yep, it definitely have an opportunity here. I will say what surprises me, I really expected to do really well. And I guess the Dreaming Tree, losing Dreaming Tree was a bigger hit than I thought. Honestly, looking at the ban list, my immediate reaction is, dang, Aurelia's feasting. But I mean, the results didn't come out for this 10K. That being said, it is just a 10K. There were what, like,
It's a, it's a yeah. I mean, it's one tournament sample size. This is, from my understanding, the biggest tournament New Zealand has ever hosted. It was
mhm.
like 350 people. I don't know what the competitive level of New Zealand is. Obviously, like I had a friend from California go, bonus from Australia, so there definitely was like some outside influence. I can't speak for the island of New Zealand itself in terms of its competitive card gaming. I don't remember like looking at like the entrance stats or like conversion rates or anything. So I don't want to like say that this event's gospel, but I do think that Aurelia definitely like it's similar to Draven, right? Like I think it does like kind of gatekeep the meta. I think both of these decks are very good. I do think like you can also do some things like I think Aurelia into Aurora now, like maybe it does kind of struggle to maintain card economy in the late game. Especially this list is playing more aggressive, right? Like it has the sneakies, it has like two drops. But if you're playing like more of a protect the castle build, like I think that deck could struggle over that. So maybe you do have to be a little more aggressive in trying to win the game early. So that may be an adjustment that people haven't made yet or will make over time, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yep. Oh, I will say one other thing I want to call out is the other thing I saw a lot on random tier lists. People talking about their predictions is they expected yellow decks to do really well. I personally did expect Rek'Sai to do well. I looked at the ban list,
Hmm.
looked at, and I was like, okay, what? Maybe it might be time. That deck did not like getting fight or flighted. It is one of the better aggro decks that actually does have a draw engine built into it, and it sees more cards than most of these aggro decks. So you eventually will find your stuff. But that absolutely did not happen here. And like you said, could be sample size, could be we just don't even have all the lists because it pretty much there are a lot of gaps here. Very
Yeah.
possible for stuff to have snuck through, but only one Victor making top 16 from a list that we have. The Victor and Azir are the only yellow deck. Is about par for the course. It feels like maybe two yellow decks have kind of in top
Hmm.
32, top 16 at the last first regional qualifiers. So not too much
Yeah.
changing there, at least in this event.
Yeah. I think these yellow decks do definitely have potential, but I like again, if Draven is as prominent as I'm kind of anticipating, and it wasn't anticipated by maybe the rest of the field as early. Like yellow does feast into that field of like we'll say Yi and like some of those Aurora decks, right? Like I think it does have great matchups into those. But again, like Draven kind of gate kept the meta for a reason. Victor obviously performed pretty well in China in like a slower meta over there. Like we saw the control deck perform pretty well. We've seen like the yellow build with more units play out. So I think there is still room for a deck like Victor to perform well. I also do think Rek'Sai has like similar to Lucian, right? Where I think it does have like some things going for it. I think being able to play Imperial Decree is really strong. That card I think fixes a lot of issues in against like top end decks. So I think there's space for it to grow for those decks to perform well. But again, I think they're like obviously still fighting the uphill battle into Draven. But again, like good Aurelia matchup. So if like you anticipate Aurelia being prominent in the format, Rex has a really strong deck to take to an event. So we'll see if that ends up being the trend. But again, if it's just like Draven runs everything, then I don't think anyone ever really saw a deck that consistently beat Meter and Draven. Like Meter and Draven beat the Miracle decks back when they were at full power, right? So like I don't think
Um,
it's really difficult to. Obviously, it did lose some tools, but like did everything else gain enough tools to even like get close to that level? And I think the answer is I'm not convinced.
quick take a look. And I will give a caveat here is people are a lot more experimental in these tournaments. I would not expect this because there's not really anything on the line. Please, there's no prizing. Get like an invite, I believe, to the top. They do like
The end
a
of season, right?
invitational style event that does have a prize, but this is like no prize. It's essentially a locals with some good players that show up. Um, so very different result, but like I said, I think there's a lot of experimenting. I believe I casted the finals of this tournament, and I mean it's very much back to a ISO list that you'd expect, where you play the little drop, more aggressive, play the little drops, you play the forerunners in the main deck, play your
Mm-hmm.
removal, you play your watchers. Pretty straightforward. It's pretty similar to set one Kaisa, with obviously just swapping out like, right, you're not playing Darius, you're playing Forerunner. I will say one of the notable things is Kaisa list have totally dropped to Kathy and Rain at this. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
is not too surprising.
Yeah, I do. The one thing that I do see in there, like I actually really like these battlefield selections. Zons I'm not sold on, but Vial is something that I've really liked. I think it may matter a little bit less now that there's not fight or flight. But I do really like Vial just like trapping these decks in early and like forcing piercing lights through. I don't think he means any, but like that was like one of the big things that I really liked about the card was like you can just like guarantee clear with that interaction. and then the other one is Grove, and I think Grover is going to see like a bit of a resurgence. We'll see if like a deck like Aurelia starts playing it. Like all those decks that kind of struggle to draw, like we saw like it was at the Monastery, which now got kind of nerfed. Dreaming Tree is now removed, so like Grove is I think like the next battlefield in line. So we'll see if these other decks are going to try and play Grove into Draven. Like obviously that's like a pretty scary proposition, but like Draven isn't going to be every round, right? So that is definitely a battlefield I can see making its way back into the meta, which I think we saw like zero of in
Yep.
set two.
Well, there's Victor lists. It feels like every Victor list is just like you have the blue. I'm not gonna call it control. Like you have the blue stun Victor, kill spell
Mm.
Victor, and then you have the aggro, and then every Victor player just like where on this gray area do or on this gradient do I want to go? They pick there. I
Yeah,
never really feel like I see people commit fully to either side, which is fair. But this one leaning a little bit more into the excuse me the control as they are playing like the consult for more draw, triple wages, double singularity. I mean, yellow deck good. They are playing the card sharp. I personally have found myself hating this card, but you
yeah,
are looking to generate gold. It is a good option.
yeah. I think this list is like solid. Like I think the biggest issue, like the big thing everyone makes fun of Victor for is like this deck can't attack over whatever the threshold is, like 4 might.
Yeah.
So Xin Zhao helps with that. Glass Mixologist helps with that a little bit. So and then like obviously like Void B plus Wages of Pain. So there's definitely some a little bit better tools than we've had in the past. But I do think that you do have to have more of those early game units to even attempt to have that level, like to have that level of play. Especially against a deck like we'll say like you're playing against a Rek'Sai, like it's a deck that hit like when it was the control deck, it was like from my understanding like a 90-10 in the Rek'Sai's favor. But now with this build, you can at least have a little bit more of a chance than you did previously.
At this worth looking at. So those were the a couple tournaments that did happen post banlist. So we have a Leal coming up, which is going to be the first big Western tournament. I believe it's just the first big tournament total. I think there have been like some Chinese smaller ones, like a few people maybe, like their equivalent of locals to like large local size. But the very first big tournament coming up with the ban list is going to be Lille. And Aaron, what do you expect to do good at Lille? What do you expect are going to be the good decks when we have 2,000 people in a room playing for, I mean, an actual prize pool with stuff on the line? What's your kind of predictions for this format?
Yeah, I think it's like I've kind of been hinting. I think it's going to be Draven. I think there's some decks that can do things into it. Like I think Master Yi with Aurora has a chance into it. I think Kaisa, if you build with a lot of respect for it, where you're playing a lot of removal, like you have some you have chances, right? Like you can play the Lucian deck. Like I think that deck, like if you go on a good run, you can do well. But I've seen some tier lists that like make, and even my initial thoughts of the format, I was like, okay, Aurelia's going to be one of the better decks, and then Draven maybe like loses a fair bit. And even like I've been struggling to build the Draven deck in like a way that I'm super happy with. And I look at a lot of these lists and I'm just like, okay, like I don't love them. I don't know how to really fix it. But like the hero power is just so overpowered that like you can't. It doesn't really matter what the issue is. Like you're just gonna be fine, because of how consistent it is and how like impactful it is on the game. So there's not really anything that can be done about that. Yeah, so I think Draven's gonna be like the driving force of this meta. Other than that, I think there, like I said, I think Kai'Sa's solid. I think we've got some Aurora decks that can play out. Me and you, we've been looking at the Volibear deck. I think like that actually has a better Draven matchup maybe than some of the other ones, just because like you're not gonna lose the early game as hard as some of the other decks. I'm very curious to see if Rek'Sai ends up becoming better. Like I like the idea of Rek'Sai and Victor. I think Yellow has some good tools going forward. It's really strong into Aurelia and also some of the Aurora decks. But those decks also got eaten alive by Kaisa and Draven. Like they just kind of struggled in there. So I think it's really meta dependent to see if those play out. But everything that I've mentioned so far, like Aurora, I think Victor and Rek'Sai with like as aggressive decks, Aurelia, Draven, Kaisa. We'll throw Lucian there, and then like Aurora. Like I don't see anything. Like I don't look at like a deck like Fiora or Ari or even like Annie. It just has like the old set two build, and I'm like, yep, like those decks are gonna like compete now. Like I think they're definitely behind the curve in terms of doing what everything else does, and just like they don't have a niche that like really sells them to me as like good decks in the format.
Yep, I am mostly on the same page. I think that Draven is just going to dominate, and I think it is a bit of a a bit disappointing that people. I'm not going to say content creators are misleading people, but it's like a lot of clickbait. Like Draven dead in a ditch. Draven is still the best deck. I Draven's still the best deck. I think Draven is going to have a similar meta share as before. I think Draven is going to have a similar top cut. What do you call it? Conversion.
Representation or
Yeah,
conversion. Yeah.
as before. That being said, I do think there are some good options now. I do think it is pretty likely we see at least one or two yellow decks in the top eight. I think yellow decks potentially could be pretty good here. Victor or Rek'Sai. Um, if Aurora, I would say I would like Aurora specifically for the Draven matchup if yellow decks also weren't getting like a buff from this. Because yellow
Mhm.
is notoriously the worst matchup for Aurora, and it is not like it's not something that you can beat through player skill a lot of times. It is my opponent has played like a unit every turn that's sometimes makes more units. By the time I've established a single body, my opponent has like 12 units in base and a decree is game over. And like there's
Yeah.
not really anything you can do about it unless you are specifically playing Yi, which has a counter spell. But even if you play Yi with a counter spell, like you don't have enough board to deal with this. You're still just gonna lose to them being at 7 points, and all they have to do is sneak a single point, and the game's over. Uh,
Mhm.
so I think while Aurora decks are decent, I think that the air quote rise, I say rise in a very
Generous.
caveated way. Like I think they're better. I don't think the representation will change that much. I think yellow decks got better, so they're gonna do better, and you're gonna play versus. But Draven's still gonna dominate, in my opinion. Personally, I I am taking Volibear to Lille, so I am a believer. I think that the Draven matchup is pretty solid. Me and Aaron were doing some testing yesterday, and it went pretty decent. Played against
Yeah.
Aaron and one of our other friends, and it was doing pretty well. Admittedly, my build was changing a little bit, but I like the deck. I'm praying not to play against any Victor or Rek'Sai because that will be very sad, but I'm sure it'll happen
But
at
even
least
against
one
those decks,
round.
like you tempo out a little bit early, like you're not gonna get kind of blown out. Like Cold a Week isn't as oppressive because like you played units up to the course of the game and kind of like you're definitely unfavored. But I think if your goal is like, okay, I want to respect some of those more like aggressive yellow decks, like I think Volley is the deck that kind of does that better than the other ones, where the other ones just kind of like rely on the Aurora game plan. So I think like you could genuinely like side out Volibear in some matchup or not Volibear, sorry, Aurora in some matchups if you think like salvage is coming in or whatever, and be comfortable. So like I don't think the deck's like meta defining or anything special, but I think it definitely it's not a bad choice now. Like I think it has I think like a decent Draven matchup. I don't think nothing has a good Draven matchup, but of the decks that I've played, it's definitely solid.
So wish me luck on my metal card adventure. Surely beyond a metal, right? Like surely. But
We believe.
I am gonna be going for that metal card, and hopefully it does well. But with that, I believe that is all the topics we did have for today. So thank you guys for tuning in. Episode 6. Any last thoughts, Aaron?
No, good luck to you and Leo. Hope you have a good time, and I'm excited to see something other than Draven take an event for once. You know, surely that'll be the case.
Absolutely. So thanks everyone for stopping by, and make sure you sub to the channel if you want to see more. I will see anybody in Lille. Say hi to me. See me. You can tell by my bandana. I'll be the tall dude with